Thank you very much, colleagues. We're going to move on now to our next item of business, which is consideration of business motion 24273 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a revision to this week's business. Could I call on the Minister to move the motion?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. No member has indicated they wish to speak on the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 24273 be agreed. Are we agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Thank you. The next item of business is topical questions. Our first question today is from Alison Johnson.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the detection of the so-called Brazilian variant of COVID-19 in Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary Jean Freeman.
3 cases of the COVID-19 variant of concern, first identified in Japan but associated with Manaus in Brazil, have been identified in Scotland. These relate to 3 individuals who travelled from Brazil to Aberdeen via Paris and London. As you would expect, contact tracing has been undertaken, close contacts followed up and offered testing as usual, and in an additional precautionary step, the close contacts of these contacts have been identified and followed up. This additional step is being undertaken to ensure that all possible precautions are underway. Passengers on the Heathrow to Aberdeen flight on the afternoon of the 29th of January, that is flight BA1312, are being contacted. However, because not all the data we've received about the passengers is correct, we are asking that anyone on that flight who did not provide up-to-date contact details should call NHS National Contact Tracing Centre on 0800 030 8012. There is no evidence currently of community transmission, but this is of course being closely monitored by Public Health Scotland and the Public Health team at NHS Grampian, with our national clinical advisors in close contact with both. The variant is of concern in terms of both the possibility that it is more contagious than the current dominant COVID-19 strain in Scotland and how it responds to the current vaccines. The extensive and detailed work to reach a confirmed expert view on both aspects here continues.
Thank you. Alison Johnson.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware that the Brazilian variant has now been found in 15 countries that aren't on the UK Government's red list. Does the Cabinet Secretary accept that current border restrictions cannot adequately protect people in Scotland from this concerning strain of COVID-19?
Cabinet Secretary.
I absolutely do, as does the Scottish Government, which is why we want to see much tougher protections on our international borders around the whole of the UK for all international travellers. As Ms Johnson rightly says, it is detected in other countries that are not currently on that red list. And it is important to recognise that whilst we have an advanced genomic sequencing capacity here in Scotland and in the rest of the UK, that is not the case necessarily in countries around the globe, and so it is difficult for them to know if they have any particular variant, which makes it then difficult globally for that to be understood. One of the key ways it can be understood, and therefore citizens here and elsewhere protected, is to have that managed isolation system and the testing that is part of that, which can then be genomically sequenced and variants can be identified. As she knows, the point of the virus, the point of all viruses, is to mutate whenever given the opportunity, and it is those mutations that we need to be able to identify quickly and then act to protect our citizens against.
Alison Johnson.
Thank you. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise what proportion of samples are currently being sequenced to detect strains of concern? And does Scotland have access to an adequate proportion of UK capacity? And what action is the Scottish Government taking to increase genome sequencing capacity in Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
So, genomic sequencing is carried out by the COG UK partnership, as it is known, which has 2 partner organisations in Scotland, and by NHS Scotland's sequencing service. A representative number of positive PCR samples in Scotland are genomically sequenced. That can be increased when we have situations like this, where a variant is identified. That percentage is usually in normal times around 4 to 5%, but as I say, that can be increased. Additional testing and sequencing provisions are in place for people returning from travel abroad. But as recently as yesterday, I had a further conversation with our Chief Medical Officer, who will pursue the option of further increasing our capacity here in Scotland in terms of genomic sequencing, because as we look ahead, we can undoubtedly see alongside our increased testing capacity the additional precautionary and protective steps that further genomic sequencing on the basis of an increased sampling of positive PCR tests might give us further protection measures.
Thank you. Gillian Martin, to be followed by Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Reading about the circumstances surrounding the 3 people from the North East who came back from Brazil with a new strain, I've got concerns over the risks of bringing in new strains from those travelling via airport hubs in countries not deemed to be high risk at the moment, but starting their journeys from high-risk areas. People not being required to quarantine at their first entry into the UK to stop the spreading of infection as they make their way to their final destination. And given that new strains can take time to be identified, isn't it time that the UK Government follow Scotland and adopt the same policy of quarantine from every country, not just those deemed high risk at a certain point? And I'd be interested to hear what conversations have been had with the UK Government on all those points.
Cabinet Secretary.
So I completely agree with all the points that Ms Martin is making, and I think this instance simply exemplifies why our approach as the Scottish Government, requiring much tighter controls in all our international borders, is so important. And she is right that the ideal and the correct position, and the one that we continue to press the UK Government on, is that at the very least, passengers whose final destination is Scotland should be required to quarantine at the first point of entry and not then come through any of those hubs south of the border and then travel to Scotland, because that obviously creates a gap in all the protective measures that we need to put in place. My colleague, Mr Matheson, has these conversations regularly with his counterpart. I know that the First Minister has raised it on certainly more than one occasion, and at the regular Four Nations Health Ministers meetings that I have, at least weekly at the moment, I do raise that, and I know that my colleagues elsewhere share those concerns, and particularly around, even if you stick with the red list, how quickly it is possible, and the answer to that is not very quickly, how quickly it is possible to identify countries that should enter into that red list or not. So the more straightforward way and the more protective way to undertake this approach and make sure that we can guard against inward transmission in a better and more proportionate way than is currently the case is to say that all international arrivals, with the exemptions that are already there, all international arrivals should have to enter managed quarantine.
Thank you. And Jackie Bailey.
The concerns about the Brazilian variant are that is potentially spreading more easily and it can evade the immune system, leading to reinfections. There are 2 cases of the Brazilian variant of COVID-19 found in South Gloucestershire. They're doing surge testing, including door-to-door testing, for people living in particular postcodes. There are 3 cases in Aberdeen, so I'd be interested to know, what is the Scottish Government doing? We've previously raised the need for using all available testing capacity, so is the Scottish Government testing everybody who is on the plane, and will they use surge testing to stop the spread of this much more infectious virus?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thanks very much, and can I welcome Ms Bailey to her new portfolio. I look forward to our constructive engagement in the remaining weeks. In terms of her particular question, what we are doing around those cases in Aberdeen is targeted testing. So let me take that in steps. The 2 of the individuals who were from those 3 cases required a level of hospital treatment. All those staff who were in contact with those individuals have been tested, in addition to the regular testing, of course, that our NHS staff undergo. There is a connection with a local school, again, testing for those involved there, as well as testing offered to close contacts where they have been experiencing symptoms, and to those passengers on that Heathrow to Aberdeen flight who we are contacting, including the crew where testing is offered should they be experiencing any symptoms, remembering the time lag between the date of that flight and now. So that is the basis on which that work is being undertaken. My understanding of what is happening from Public Health England potentially relates to a later flight that entered from Brazil via Zurich, I think, in this instance, where surge testing, because of the nature of the cases there, which had not initially isolated in the way that ours did, I can understand the sense of that. But the decision around testing and how it is used is, of course, clinically led by our experts in public health.
Thank you very much. Question number 2, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will publish the legal advice that it received regarding the judicial review into the handling of harassment complaints against the former First Minister, Alex Salmond.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, the maintenance of legal professional privilege is routine and is an essential part of good government. No administration since devolution has disclosed legal advice in the context of litigation, and I have expressed my concern about setting a precedent that could hamper future administrations in receiving candid legal advice. The Government has taken unprecedented steps to share with the Committee in confidence a summary of the legal advice it received during the judicial review, supplemented by oral evidence by the Lord Advocate. However, over recent days, a number of accusations have been raised which, if not responded to, could undermine confidence in the Parliament, the Government and our independent justice system. In light of these developments, I have concluded, in line with the terms of Section 2.40 of the Scottish Ministerial Code, that the balance of public interest in these exceptional circumstances now lies in releasing to the Committee and for publication the contents of legal advice received by the Government during the judicial review, in particular the advice from external counsel. The law officers have provided their consent that there are compelling reasons for disclosure in these specific circumstances. Subject to the completion of the necessary legal notifications, we aim to release the material to the Committee this afternoon. In order to address the desire for this information to be available as soon as possible, we have focused on providing information that charts the development of the judicial review and specifically the changes in prospects that emerged during that process.
Murdo Fraser.
Presiding Officer, this episode just demonstrates the contempt that this Government holds for the Scottish Parliament. For months, the committee has been calling for publication of the legal advice. There have been 2 votes in Parliament last year calling for it to be published. And only now, at the very last moment, when a metaphorical gun is held to the head of the Deputy First Minister and he is threatened with a vote of no confidence, does he finally agree to release some legal advice at the very last possible moment. Presiding Officer, we have not yet seen the documents Mr Swinney refers to. However, last night, Mr Salmond's lawyers told us the material that the Scottish Government were proposing to release was, in their words, highly selective and based on what will cause the least embarrassment to the Government. So can the Deputy First Minister assure us that the requests from the committee for publication of all relevant documents will be met, or will he continue to cover up the truth?
Cabinet Secretary Mr Swinney.
Presiding Officer, first of all, can I say that when, if I heard Mr Fraser correctly, and I may have misheard him, and if I do, I will apologise, but I think he said that a gun had been metaphorically held to my head. Now, I don't think, Presiding Officer, that's appropriate terminology for one Member of Parliament to use to another. Absolutely. Neither, Presiding Officer, did I think it was appropriate that some other Conservative MSPs expressed in some language which I think is wholly inappropriate for one human being to express to another, to be expressed from one Member of Parliament to another. So I'll simply say that to get that off my chest. The second point is that Mr Fraser, as well as being a Member of Parliament, is also a trained solicitor. He knows the importance, from his professional background, of the principle of legal professional privilege. He knows how central it is to the foundations of the Scottish legal system and the relationship between clients and advisers. And for government, in litigation, that is central. So the government has wrestled with that difficult issue, and we have concluded that in the public interest it is right to act in the way that we are now acting. Finally, Mr Fraser has raised comments made by the solicitors for the former First Minister. I would simply encourage Mr Fraser to wait till he sees the information that we publish, and then I'm sure he can apply the usual independent judgment with which we normally associate with Mr Fraser to the material that he sees before him.
Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think, frankly, we can do without Mr Swinney's manufactured outrage in this matter. He and his government have behaved disgracefully in this whole affair, and he should be apologising to the Chamber for his conduct throughout this whole episode. But, Presiding Officer, the legal advice we are now being offered will not be made available to the committee before the First Minister comes to give us evidence at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. How does the Deputy First Minister propose the members of the committee will be able to pursue questions that might arise from the legal advice with the First Minister, or indeed anybody else in this government, given it has been produced to us so late in the day?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the information will be available later on this afternoon, so unless Mr Fraser goes to his bed at 5 o'clock, he can read it tonight.
Neil Findlay.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. Friday's evidence session was extraordinary, to say the least, and threw up many questions. I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary can answer this. Which of these are the most serious? A failure to declare a £950 campaign donation, a muddle over an office sublet, or withholding up to 40 documents that have been requested by the police under a search warrant?
Well, it's not for me to offer legal advice across the parliamentary chamber. What's important is that the government has fulfilled its obligations in providing information to this committee, and we will complete that task this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Mr Swinney. We're going to move on to the next item of business.